Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. If you are a horror fan, you're going to want to check out the film by today's guests, Arkasha Stevenson and Tim Smith. They are co-screenwriters of The First Omen, the terrifying prequel to the original 1976 Richard Donner classic, The Omen. Arkasha and Tim are a team who have written and produced projects for AMC, Hulu, Netflix, Sci-Fi, and Amazon, including Channel Zero, Butcher's Block, Legion, and Briar Patch. Welcome to the show, Arkasha and Tim.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for being here. This is exciting. You know, we don't get such a huge kind of iconic series getting a prequel like this so far after it's come out. But before we get into that, I always like to start, we always like to start with kind of getting to know you, like how you started as a writer and you to especially how you became a team and started working together.
Oh gosh. Well, I think, writing was kind of just a necessity in film school. There were all these stories that I wanted to tell because I was coming into film school from photojournalism. And I wasn't really fully aware of how to be a director yet and didn't want to fully commit to being a writer. So I used to write on napkins in pencil because it felt like it took the pressure off, they were all disposable ideas. But then I just kept writing through school. And then once I got out of school, I wrote this script that Tim got to read. And that's actually how we met, was through this script. It was a short film called Pineapple.
Yeah, and for me, I went to USC, and it's funny. You're in film school and you're writing constantly and making movies constantly, and then everybody's experience is different. But for me, you get out and the ground kind of falls out from beneath you, and you're doing whatever you can to kind of stay in the industry. So I was, working on making all types of different things, branded content and music videos and promotional videos. And I was in some woman's apartment making a yoga tutorial, trading writing notes with somebody I was working with on like scripts that we were writing. So, I writing had kind of been relegated to something I had to do on the side. And then it was only after Kasha and I did Channel Zero where financially we were able to finally treat ourselves as full-time writers, and we were able to kind of write as a profession. And that was when I think we were both able to kind of really sharpen that tool once we kind of had the freedom and flexibility to treat that as our day job.
Yeah. Talk about imposter syndrome. We're like, oh my gosh, you guys are paying us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like once people started paying us, we're like, well, I guess we are writers now. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm trying to imagine what notes you would give on a yoga video, but anyway.
Oh no, yeah, notes on nothing about yoga. We had to watch yoga, and in between takes, we're like, okay, let's talk about the stuff we really want to talk about.
But Tim's got notes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I learned a lot about yoga.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. Arkasha, hearing that you came from a photojournalism background, I did too, actually. So I was like, oh yay, that's awesome. So you wanted to go into narrative, not documentaries, because it seems to be the natural progression for a lot of people coming out of journalism to go into documentaries. So what drew you to narrative over that?
David Lynch.
Oh.
Yeah, it was so, I was really in love with photojournalism. I'm just a really shy person, and this was like a really cool way to get out and get to know people and explore the world. And but I've always been drawn to horror, and I think I almost feel like it follows me. I interned at the Miami Herald, and my last day was the day that man got naked and ate that other man's face off. And then I came to LA to intern at the paper here, and that was the week that they found a decapitated head in Griffith Park. So I feel like I speak it in or something.
Oh, the good old days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right. Did I just age myself? But then when I saw a David Lynch film, it really, like, I feel like my brain exploded, because I feel like you experience so many surreal things through journalism that if you were to tell another person, they would think that you made it up or there was something supernatural. And really what I think it is just like very fringe emotions and populations and situations that will appear surreal or supernatural to the mainstream. And I feel like that's what David Lynch is that he's, secretly a social realist. Sorry, that was a really long answer to your.
No, that was cool.
That was awesome.
Yeah. So, when did you actually start working together, and then how did you guys come into this film, onto this project?
Well, we worked together, right out of film school. We made this project called Pineapple, which was, I always kind of jokingly say, during the height of the webisode, if such a thing existed. It was 30 minutes, but it was conceived of to be broken up into 3 10-minute episodes. So it played at Sundance in their Midnight Shorts program. And, after that, we had such a great experience, and Kasha got the opportunity to do Channel Zero. And they said, in the past, we've had this policy where you can bring on a creative partner, a producer, to kind of help ease the transition into taking on, 6 episodes of a television season. And we had just gotten off of Pineapple, and Kosh was like, want to come make this television show? And we did that together. And then after that, we started developing and writing together. And that kind of, from the beginning of that process to now, it's been 8 years of, developing and working in television while we aspired to, work in the world of feature films. So this is really 8 years in the making. We've been trying to make a film together.
Yeah. And in the midst of that, we fell in love.
Aww, in a horror film.
Wonderful. Yeah, exactly.
Nothing keeps people together like writing about, decapitated bodies and
possession.
Yeah,
like
things
the
like
devil.
That.
Exactly. Yeah.
First date conversations.
Yeah. So did you guys develop this prequel on your own, or was it did you go to the, I know David Seltzer was the one who wrote the original, and the remake of the original. How did you kind of work out the rights and the coordination of that to be able to write this?
Yeah, well, you know what? We actually inherited the script that was already, I feel like, it already had the structure in place.
Okay.
When we read it, yeah. And I think that what we did when we came on, why we came on, I think besides wanting to it's a dream to be part of the Omen franchise, we've been huge fans since we were kids, was we were really excited that it was going to be through the perspective of this novitiate and this young woman. And we just thought that was so unique because, the Omen franchise is a pretty beefy masculine franchise, and so to re-enter the universe through this woman was really fascinating to us. But that was already in place when we got the script. So one of the things that we did when we got the script was really try and personalize it, and then really focus all of the horror through the female perspective and through this character's perspective, particularly as it pertained to the themes of birth and our lead character's body.
Wow. Okay, so that's really cool. So you did see this when you were younger. How old were you when you first saw the original Omen?
I think I was 7.
Yeah, I think it was about the same age. Yeah.
That's pretty young.
Yeah, it's an impression.
Yeah.
Did that shape like you wanting to become a writer and a producer or a director and write in that genre, or was it kind of?
When you're 7, you don't know what genre is. You don't know what a horror film is, so you're just watching these films through absolutely zero filter. So I think it's which is almost, I'm really thankful for that, actually, because you're watching these characters as humans and not expecting these horrible things to happen to them, and so you're starting to really fall in love with them and relate to them, and then something horrific happens, and it really strikes at the core of your heart. And I think that's kind of the key to really great horror films, is that it feels so realistic because the characters are so, multidimensional and relatable.
Yeah. We talk about this a lot, where, The Omen for me was a big turning point, where I'd watched a lot of horror films, bizarrely enough, as a young kid. And this one, to me, really stuck with me because the horror felt so grounded despite the kind of supernatural premise. I think that's one of the special things about the film, is that it takes the otherworldly and makes it so disturbingly kind of tactile and resonant to our everyday life. And I know, it wasn't like at 7 years old I was like, I'm gonna do that. But I think looking back on the films that I watched at really pivotal moments in my life, that I think was a turning point where I thought to myself, I want to capture that feeling of horror existing in the everyday world, and it kind of feeling very, very much grounded in our everyday experience.
Yeah. Tim was lucky he came out of the womb knowing he wanted to make movies.
It's good to have a direction. And
Yeah.
I agree with you. Like, I think when it's logical like that, it's even more scary, you know?
Yeah, exactly. When there's not too many kind of layers of separation from our daily experience, I think that's when it can get really, really terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting thing about the original Omen, is that you are so embedded in these characters and these real life situations that you almost question if there is a supernatural element. And
Mhm.
obviously, you end up watching the movie and there very obviously is, but feeling like you don't know your child, or you don't know or trust somebody you love, I think is horror, even without the child being in the Antichrist.
Man, that'd be a horrible thing to experience.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Ooh. Now, question for both of you, although I think this is more towards Tim, because I know on your IMDb you're listed primarily as a producer. What was it like coming at the script, really any script, with a producer's eye?
Well, it's really great, especially Kasha and I working together, because from the moment you start writing as a producer and director working together, you're immediately tackling it from a physical production standpoint. You're always interrogating, how are we going to shoot this? How is this going to logistically be made? Are we setting ourselves up the right way to take this on? And we kind of jokingly say with this film, it's like we made all these rookie mistakes because it's a film set in an orphanage with a bunch of young girls dealing with practical fire with all these gags in Rome. So there are a lot of things that I think somebody would look at and think to themselves, that is a challenge you don't want to set yourself up for. But I think that is the benefit of the experience we've had, is that we know, how we're going to shoot something. We know the challenge from a production standpoint that we're taking on. So that's a part of the conversation early on, so that by the time you are in prep and getting ready to shoot, there's really very little surprises.
Yeah. And then it's so funny because Tim always asks me, okay, so how are you going to do this? And my answer is always like, oh, movie magic. And you're like, no, 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 no. Actually, how are you going to do this? And then we had this moment when we were writing one of the drafts of the script, and Tim goes, okay, so we just wrote a riot. And I was like, oh God, we did.
Is that a riot with like 4 people in it or something?
Yeah.
Can we do a riot with like 4, maybe 5 people?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, but it ended up being really, really great. We ended up shooting that scene. We had like 300 extras.
Wow.
Oh
And
my gosh.
I was so terrified. I had never shot a scene that big before. We haven't, I don't think, ever. And we did the first take, and then all of the extras started cheering and clapping. And I was like, yes, but we're going again. You guys know that, right?
Oh
And
no.
then after the second take, they started cheering and clapping, and they did that all day. And it made this like very
Aw.
daunting scene into this big block party. That was so much
Yeah.
fun.
It was amazing. And that was over the course, we filmed that scene over the course of 3 days. So it was almost like a test of their, how geared up they were and willing they were to participate. We were kind of holding our breath after every take to make sure they were going to smile and clap.
Yeah.
But it became a pretty heavy burden on them because we just stared at them and said, are you guys not happy anymore?
Yeah.
They would start clapping.
Do you want your crowd of rioters to be happy?
Yeah, exactly. It's very surreal. That's what we always jokingly say. Some of the most horrific moments in the film, oddly enough, we have really great memories because of the camaraderie on set, and people are actually very happy despite the disturbing nature of the content.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And
good.
your extras will make or break you, and I think one of the beautiful things about Italians is that no matter who they are or what their job is, they're all artists. And
Yeah.
so it's like having,
And it's difficult to hide their emotions.
yes,
So for better or worse, you know how they're feeling.
yeah, which is great when
Yeah.
you're making a movie.
Yeah.
But going back to the creation of that scene and the film, do do you not feel like you were like censoring yourselves knowing about the production side? Like as a writer, you can just like put anything on the page and it's someone else's problem to figure out how to make it, but you're doing both. So do you feel like you were restricting yourselves at all?
I don't, yeah, well, I think you could look at it that way, but I also don't think, I don't ever want to step into the role as a director and push something off as somebody else's problem.
Right.
Like I think we always want to have at least ideas of how to accomplish something, um, even if maybe that's not how we'll end up executing it. We had this is our first feature, but we were working with Oscar winners, and our DP was Aaron Morton, and our production designer was Eve Stewart, and Paco Delgado did our costume. So it's like we did have so much support and so much knowledge and experience to draw from. But I still want to be able to feed people some sort of direction.
No, that's totally cool. I totally understand that. Yeah, when you're writing, you do definitely want to. Um, you're thinking about production in some ways because a lot of times we're writing because we want to write a low budget film or a micro budget film, or if you know your budget's going to be higher, you can kind of look at doing more interesting things. So I guess that was kind of like a little narrow minded of me to ask it that way, but I get what you're saying. So.
No, no, no. It's actually really interesting, because I think one of the things that we had to get used to was exactly that, not censoring ourselves and being able to expand the world. And people don't tell you no very often on these films, which is well, no, that's not true. But I
A
mean,
lot
people,
less than they would on a shoestring budget, which we're
yeah,
so used to working on. But yeah, like Kosh was saying too, it's even like something as simple as writing something, and the next day you can watch a film or look at a piece of art or have a conversation and kind of immediately be inspired and say, this is how I want it to look, or this is a visual reference, or this is something that conveys the tone that I'm going for. So you can kind of already start building that arsenal of references and kind of materials that help you to fall back on kind of the way you want to shoot it.
yeah.
Cool. Um, from the page, what are the key elements that you felt you had to put into this to get to do horror on the page? Is a little you know horror a lot of times is music, it's ambiance, it's scene, it's setting, but when you're writing it, how do you convey that? What do you always want to include when you're doing your horror stuff?
Mm. Yeah, writing's kind of a dangerous thing, right? Because it's easy to write something down and kind of ignore the reality of it. And I've had so many moments where we've written something, and then we'll be shooting it, and it will be absolutely terrifying. And and I will be like, oh my God, we manifested this without realizing kind of how visceral it is. So I think that's something that always really shocks me, when you start to see the reality of the words you're putting down on paper. Um, so that is something that we do try to pay attention to as much as possible. That doesn't really answer your question, though.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, Kasha is such a very specific aesthetic and kind of visual style. And I think trying to capture as much of that on the page to try to sync, actors and department heads into kind of the rhythm and tone of the movie to try and give people a sense of kind of the vibe and the visual style and reflecting that on the page, because sometimes it's so difficult to channel that, but we really do, rather than writing very sparsely, we try to really give as much visual language to convey how we want it to look as possible.
Yeah.
And that had to include the setting because you guys are writing a prequel to something that came out in 1976. So you're dealing with it's, I don't know, it's like a period piece pretty much, so you have to think about it that way as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. We actually, before we were greenlit, we went out to Rome and stayed there for a couple weeks to really just kind of take everything in and make sure we actually knew what we were talking about when we were writing about Rome in 1971 when the film is set. And we were already so in love with watching films from the 70s, so that was kind of easy to imbibe all of that. But I think from the way we shot it to the way we presented Rome, we were very much trying to channel not only the spirit of Rome, but also the spirit of Rome in the 70s.
Cool. Did you work with David Seltzer at all on this? He wrote the original and the remake. I think he's got a credit on the film. Did you work with him at all on it?
No, yeah, we didn't work with them. I think, one of the things that was really exciting to us is, we really, it's such a seminal film, and we're so protective of horror classics, any classic film, but we just didn't want to set out to remake The Omen. I think it was so crucial to us to kind of pave our own path within the franchise, which is what, exploring Damien's origins kind of allowed us to do. So from the outset, it was really important to us to kind of tell our own story within this world. Which is why we kind of wanted to confine it to us in the development process.
Very cool. Okay, this has nothing to do with writing and us just being very curious, but you know how a lot of horror films have like that whole cursed production thing? And I understand The Omen itself, the original, the remake, and even a documentary all had like little weirdnesses around it. Did anything weird happen to you guys while you were on set filming the prequel?
This is really boring, but strikes to the real life horror element of all this. Is we had a horrific COVID outbreak during shooting.
Oh,
Wow.
85 members of the crew, including Kasha, got COVID. We had to shut down for a week or so in the middle of shooting, and it was wild. We were going to like the third string in our grip and electric department, having to source a new DP because our DP was out with COVID, and a first AD, our second AD had to step in. It was wild. So it's funny, we didn't have any of those. You read, like you said, all the time about those stories centered around horror classics, and we actually didn't have much of that at all. We just had kind of the real life horror of COVID wreaking havoc on the set.
Yeah.
Well, pandemics are basically the basis of all zombie movies. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome. So, and if people want to find you, learn more about the movie, see what we should ask, what are you guys working on in the future that you're allowed to talk about?
Oh gosh, well, we can tell you that it's definitely going to be in the realm of horror. We definitely love living in this sandbox.
Yeah, it was nice. Like we were talking about, we spent a long time developing all kinds of different projects, and then we got this job that's kind of taken over our lives the past 2 years. So we're super excited to pick up those projects and hopefully get them going here really quickly.
Very cool. Very cool. So if people want to find you, how can they do so?
They cannot, because we are old people and are not on social media.
Yeah.
Which is actually probably very smart. So
Yeah,
so
exactly.
instead, just go to the theater, go see First Omen. Why did I say final? Go see the First Omen, April 5th. Theaters everywhere. And yes, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks
thank you
so
so
much for all your
much.
great questions.
thanks, guys. Do follow us online at WG Therapy and visit writersgrouptherapy.com for more episodes. Thanks.